In Ireland, a single mother named Sarah moves to a house in the countryside with her son, Chris, to start a new life. On their way there, Sarah nearly hits someone who suddenly appears in the middle of the road. After checking that Chris is okay, she gets out of the car to see who the person is. The stranger turns out to be Noreen, an elderly woman who keeps whispering, "He's not my son." Noreen refuses to answer any of Sarah's questions, and when she turns around and stares at Chris, she seems very creepy. Sarah doesn't want to take any risks, so she picks up her car's broken side view mirror and drives away with her son. Raising Chris alone isn't easy for Sarah. They sometimes argue about small things, like how picky Chris is with food, but most of the time, they have a strong relationship. Sarah always hugs Chris and tells him she loves him. They even have a little game where they make funny faces at each other to laugh together. One day during lunch, Chris suddenly screams because he finds a spider in the kitchen. Sarah catches it and lets it go outside, but Chris doesn't like that because he thinks it might come back. Upset, he says his dad would have killed the spider and then asks why his dad didn't come with him. Sarah finds it hard to explain, so she just says it's complicated. This makes Chris even more upset. He stomps on the spider, calls his mom a liar, and runs into the woods. Sarah quickly chases after him. The wind blows harder the deeper she goes into the trees. Then she finds something shocking, both amazing and terrifying, a huge sinkhole in the ground. Before she can figure out what to do, Chris appears behind her and apologizes for bringing up his dad, even though he knows it makes her sad. Sarah hugs him and leads him away, not wanting him to see the sinkhole. Later that night, Sarah hears the back door creak, so she makes sure to lock it before heading to bed. Chris starts out at a new school, but he struggles to make friends. When he's handed a flyer for the school's upcoming talent contest, Sarah encourages him to join. She says it might help him make some new friends, but Chris isn't sure about it. Sometime later, Sarah goes to a dinner party with some of her new friends, including her boss, Louise. While everyone is sharing wild stories, Sarah hears about Noreen, the same woman she saw on the road. It turns out most people in town think Noreen is crazy. Years ago, she ran into her son's classroom, screaming and causing a scene. It took 3 teachers to pull her out. The boy was transferred to a different school, and Noreen was sent to a mental hospital. But when she was released a few months later, she ran over her son with her car. No one knows if it was an accident or if she did it on purpose. That night, when Sarah returns home, she finds it hard to sleep. The wind is howling, and the house is full of creaking noises. Suddenly, a door slams loudly. Sarah rushes out of her room to check on Chris, but he's not in his bed or anywhere else in the house. Panicked, she runs downstairs and sees the back door wide open. She grabs a flashlight and goes outside to search for her son in the middle of the night. The forest is dark and frightening, and Sarah doesn't stay long. As soon as she hears strange noises in the distance, she runs back to the house and calls the police. But just as she does, she turns around and sees Chris standing calmly in the hallway by his bedroom door. He says he's been there the whole time. The next day, Sarah visits a doctor. The doctor asks if she has any history of anxiety and checks the scar on her forehead, a mark from an accident that happened a year earlier. The doctor gives her a prescription for sedatives to help her sleep. When she gets home, she's startled when Chris suddenly appears in the kitchen just a second after she called him. This makes her even more sure that she's dealing with anxiety. So that night, she takes one of the pills before bed. The next morning, Sarah wakes up and finds Chris holding a bunch of flowers that he picked from outside. After scolding him for going outside when he wasn't supposed to, Sarah accepts the flowers and hugs Chris. The next time Sarah picks him up from school, she notices that Chris has made a lot of friends, including one boy who used to make fun of him. On their way home, they run into Noreen again, standing in the middle of the road. She and Chris just stare at each other without blinking. When honking doesn't make her move, Sarah gets out of the car to ask Noreen to step aside. But again, Noreen starts whispering. This time she says, "It's not your boy." They're suddenly interrupted by Noreen's husband, Des, who comes running and apologizes to Sarah for not keeping better watch over his wife. While Des talks to Sarah, Noreen takes the chance to walk over to the car and starts banging on the passenger window, shouting, "It's not your son." She even hits her head against the glass. Try to break it. Sarah doesn't wait any longer. She quickly drives away while Des grabs Noreen and holds her back. The next morning, while driving Chris to school, Sarah decides to stop by Noreen's house. But when she gets there, she finds Noreen dead on the ground, her head buried in the dirt. Later that day, the police visit Sarah's house to take her statement. She notices one of the officers playing arm wrestling with Chris to keep him distracted. For a moment, Sarah thinks she sees Chris use unnatural strength and even break the officer's wrist. But it turns out to be just her imagination. After the police leave, Sarah takes a shower and sees that her scar is bleeding again for some unknown reason. The next day, Sarah goes back to work, and the first thing Louise brings up is Noreen's death. Sarah changes the subject and talks about motherhood. She admits that sometimes she looks at Chris and doesn't recognize him. As a mother of twins, Louise tells her that this feeling is normal, just something that happens when your kids grow up so fast. Later, Sarah attends Noreen's funeral held at her house. Inside, Sarah sees dozens of mirrors hanging in every room, though for the funeral, they've all been covered with black cloth. Des, who is still grieving, comes over and shares a drink with her. Sarah uses the moment to ask why Noreen had said that Chris wasn't her son. Des explains that Noreen went through the same thing. After their own son turned 8, she started noticing small changes in his personality. She became convinced that the boy was no longer her real son, that he had been replaced. But Des reveals it wasn't Noreen who had killed the boy. It was Des himself. He had accidentally hit him with the car in their driveway. Days go by, and Sarah tries to return to her normal routine. While jogging through the forest, she finds Chris's favorite action figure lying on the ground. This leads her to check the sinkhole again. As she gets closer, she hears strange, whispering voices coming from deep inside. Later during lunch, Sarah is shocked to see Chris happily eating food he used to hate. This makes her suspicious, so she brings up the toy she found. Chris insists he never left the house. Sarah shows him the action figure and keeps pressing for the truth until Chris loses his temper and pushes the table at her, with strength she's never seen in him before. Realizing what he's done, Chris quickly apologizes and goes to his room. That night, Sarah hears strange noises coming from his room. She quietly walks up and peeks through the keyhole and the gap under the door. What she sees alarms her. Chris is crawling around the room on all fours. Then, she watches him catch a spider and eat it. That's too much for Sarah. She runs back to her room, panicked. When Chris comes in to check on her, she just tells him goodnight like everything is normal. The next day, Sarah takes Chris to the doctor. But after examining him, the doctor says nothing is wrong. In private, Sarah tells the doctor that Chris' behavior has been changing, but the doctor seems more worried about Sarah's mental health. He even wonders if the scar on her forehead was really caused by an accident or if it came from Chris' father. After the appointment, Sarah buys a video camera and hides it inside a wall in Chris' bedroom. That night, she decides to stop taking her sedative pills. In the morning, Chris keeps eating large amounts of food. Sarah apologizes for acting strangely lately, and Chris responds by touching her scar, then violently pushing his fingers into it. Thankfully, it turns out to be just a nightmare. In the afternoon, Sarah goes to Chris' school to watch the talent show. His class is performing as a choir, singing a song that talks about a hole in a bog. Suddenly, the room goes dark, and everyone around them disappears. Sarah is left alone on stage with Chris, who begins reciting the song's lyrics in a cold, emotionless voice. Terrified, Sarah runs out of the hall, but every exit is locked. She can't find a way out. Louise finds her and asks what's wrong. Sarah tells her, "Chris is not my son." At that moment, Chris shows up with his teacher. Sarah runs away again. This time, she manages to leave the building and rushes home. She grabs the hidden camera and checks the video footage. What she sees frightens her so much that she decides to find someone to talk to. She goes to Des' house. Des welcomes her inside. He explains that Noreen hung all the mirrors in the house because only mirrors can reveal the truth, and she always wanted to be sure Des was really her husband. Sarah shows him the footage and says that whatever had happened to Des' son is now happening to Chris too. But Des doesn't want to admit his son had a problem. He grabs the camera and smashes on the floor. Des refuses to admit he saw anything, but he also doesn't call Sarah crazy. Sarah returns home and retrieves the SD card from the broken camera. Chris is already waiting for her. He says he doesn't like being left alone. Sarah explains she had to leave because she wasn't feeling well. Chris gives her a hug. Later at dinner, it's revealed that Sarah has been secretly putting sedatives into Chris' food. Once again, he happily eats a dish he used to hate. After they eat, Sarah asks him to play their favorite game, but Chris doesn't remember it at all. That's when Sarah tells him, "You're not my son." The creature pretending to be Chris growls and attacks her. He throws her across the kitchen a few times until she passes out. A few minutes later, Sarah wakes up. The creature is dragging her across the ground, trying to bury her head in the dirt, just like what happened to Noreen. Luckily, the sedatives start working and the creature passes out before finishing the job. Because it didn't bury her fully, Sarah is able to free herself and escape. She drags the unconscious creature back to the house and leaves it on the basement floor. Then she uses the broken side view mirror to look at its face, revealing its horrifying, featureless form. The creature wakes up and attacks again, but even with its strength, Sarah is still stronger than a child's body. As the creature lets out a demonic screech, Sarah runs upstairs and locks the basement door. Now that the creature is trapped, she can focus on finding the real Chris. She grabs a flashlight and runs into the forest. At the sinkhole, she lets herself fall in. She lands inside a narrow underground tunnel. Even though the space is tight, Sarah pushes through, crawling until she enters a larger cavern. Inside, she finds bones everywhere, but she also finds Chris lying on the ground, unconscious. She picks him up and gets ready to leave. Suddenly, she hears noises. She's not alone. Several faceless creatures are waking up and getting ready to chase her. The tunnel is hard to crawl through while carrying Chris. But the good news is that only one creature can come through at a time. One shapeshifter manages to grab her wrist. As it touches her skin, it begins copying her face. Sarah fights back and hits it with her flashlight until it lets go. Once she gets out of the hole, she checks on Chris. He's alive. He wakes up and they run back to their house. Sarah runs to the car, but finds that the doors are locked. She leaves Chris beside the vehicle and runs into the house to grab her keys. While inside, she hears the fake Chris still trapped in the basement calling out to her. Sarah knows what she has to do to keep them safe. She sets the house on fire. Then she returns to the car, gets in with the real Chris, and drives away. Weeks later, Sarah and Chris have started a new life in the city. They're happy. Sarah constantly takes photos of Chris just to double check that it's really him. Their new home is full of mirrors hanging on every wall.